Tell these men the truth about her relationship, but Nicole insisted that it wasn't any of their business, so she kept her personal life to herself. One afternoon, I returned from my lunch break, and Nicole seemed tense. She told me about a man who had been flirting with her earlier. He'd made her uncomfortable, but she thought she'd handled it by politely turning him down, mentioning she was already with someone. The man had left, though she mentioned that he didn't seem too happy. At the time, I shrugged it off, assuming it was just another guy who didn't take rejection well. But later that same day, the man came back. Nicole was out helping a customer, so it was just me at the register when he walked in, immediately looking around. I could tell something was off about him, even before he came over to the counter. He approached and, without greeting me, said, "I'm here to see Nicole." I asked how he knew her, and he told me that she had agreed to go out with him earlier, so he had come back to pick her up. It was obvious he was lying, but I didn't want to escalate the situation. I quickly made up an excuse, telling him Nicole had already left for the day. The smile he wore earlier quickly faded into an annoyed frown. He muttered something about wanting to ask her out again, which didn't make sense given his previous claim that she had accepted his invite. Sensing his agitation, I decided to protect Nicole's privacy. I blurted out, "Nicole is my fiancée." His expression turned to one of confusion as he looked me up and down. With a sneer, he muttered, "How does someone like her end up with someone like you?" I kept my calm and repeated that she wasn't available and that we were getting married soon, so he needed to leave. After an awkward silence, he finally left, not without giving me a deathly glare on his way out. When Nicole returned, I told her what had happened. She found it a bit creepy but couldn't help laughing when I mentioned the fiancé story. She even joked that she'd rather be engaged to me than deal with that guy, which I took as a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the strange encounter. Until one night after closing. We were gathering the trash, preparing to lock up and go home, when suddenly there was a loud bang on the front door. It startled both of us, and when we looked, there he was again, his face pressed against the glass, staring wildly into the store. "We're closed," I called out, but he just kept banging on the door, insisting he needed to come inside. Nicole, her voice trembling slightly, yelled back for him to leave her alone. But the man's eyes never left mine as he said, "I'm not here for her. I'm here for you." And then, in a low, menacing tone, he added, "If I take out her husband, she'll be mine." Nicole, terrified, ran to the manager's office to call the police, leaving me alone with the crazed man. I won't lie, I was scared. He wasn't particularly big, but he had a dangerous look in his eyes, and I had no idea if he was armed. Store policy prohibited us from carrying any form of self-defense, so I was completely exposed. The man started ramming the sliding doors, determined to break in. The glass rattled with each hit, and I thought for sure they were going to shatter. Just as I was considering how to defend myself, Nicole came rushing back with a 2x4 in her hands, yelling that the police were on their way. Seeing her armed, the man finally gave up and ran off into the night. We locked the doors and waited.
Quer ter a chance de ganhar até R$1.000 todos os dias? Cadastre e use o seu Visa Débito para concorrer.
Anxiously for the police to arrive. When they did, they reviewed the security footage and managed to track him down later that night. Nicole and I both quit that job soon after. Even though the man had been arrested, we couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered after that night. We're still good friends and even go to the same college, but we've moved on to safer jobs. That night was a reminder of how dangerous it can be for women, and even for men, when someone refuses to take no for an answer. Last night was supposed to be like any other night out with friends. After weeks of being stuck in the office, working late on this new project, I finally had some time to unwind. Sam hit me up, and we decided to head to our usual bar for music night. It was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to be just drinks, music, maybe some flirting, like I always do. You see, I've never had a problem meeting people. A few drinks, a good smile, some smooth conversation, and things usually go my way. I've had my fair share of one-night stands, girls who seem interested for the night and disappear by morning. Nothing serious, it's just how it's been for a while. So, when I started chatting with this girl at the bar last night, things felt pretty routine. But then, everything shifted. I was mid-conversation, about to ask for her number, when I reached into my pocket and realized my phone wasn't there. I didn't panic right away. I mean, it's a busy bar. People lose things all the time. But after checking our table, the bar, the bathrooms, and even asking around, it was clear. My phone was gone. Frustrated, I went over to Sam, who was busy chatting with some girls, and asked to borrow his phone to call mine. It rang twice, and then someone answered. At first, I didn't say anything, waiting for them to speak. And then I heard it, a low, raspy giggle, followed by the words, "I found you." And then they hung up. I stood there for a moment, stunned. It was such a strange response. I called again, but this time no one picked up. I tried once more, and still nothing. "What did they say?" Sam asked, looking at me with concern. I told him, but he just shrugged it off. "Probably some idiot messing with you. Forget it, man." Maybe he was right. Maybe it was just some random person who found my phone and decided to mess with me. But something about that voice, it sent chills down my spine. Still, I didn't want to ruin the night. I figured the phone was gone, so I pushed it to the back of my mind and tried to enjoy the rest of the evening. By the time we left the bar, I was tipsy, and the strange phone call seemed like a distant memory. I stumbled home, threw myself onto the bed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm going off. Groggy, I reached over to turn it off, and that's when I saw it. My phone. Sitting right there on my nightstand, exactly where I'd left it before I went out last night. I froze, staring at it. I knew I had my phone at the bar. I knew I had lost it. So how the hell was it back here? I picked it up, my heart pounding, and opened it. The missed calls from last night were there, including the ones I made from Sam's phone. And then something else caught my eye. There was a new contact in my phone. Camilla. When I first saw the name Camilla in my phone, it didn't immediately click. I stared at the contact for a few moments, trying to remember who she was. The name seemed familiar, but my mind was foggy, probably from last night's drinks. Then, like a wave crashing over me, the memory came flooding back. It was months ago, one of those typical nights out. I had met her at a different bar, nothing out of the ordinary. It's out. Enjoy the rest of the evening. By the time we left the bar, I was tipsy, and the strange phone call seemed like a distant memory. I stumbled home, threw myself onto the bed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm going off. Groggy, I reached over to turn it off, and that's when I saw it. My phone. Sitting right there on my nightstand, exactly where I'd left it before I went out last night. I froze, staring at it. I knew I had my phone at the bar. I knew I had lost it. So how the hell was it back here? I picked it up, my heart pounding, and opened it. The missed calls from last night were there, including the ones I made from Sam's phone. Then something else caught my eye. There was a new contact in my phone. Camilla. When I first saw the name Camilla on my phone, it didn't immediately click. I stared at the contact for a few moments, trying to remember who she was. The name seemed familiar, but my mind was foggy, probably from last night's drinks. Then, like a wave crashing over me, the memory came flooding back. It was months ago, one of those typical nights out. I had met her at a different bar, nothing out of the ordinary. She had been friendly, a little too friendly, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We spent the evening together, and I remember she kept telling me over and over again how much she liked me. Not in the usual flirty way, though. There was something intense about the way she said it. "I like you the most, Mike," she had whispered in my ear sincerely while I was busy serving her. Her eyes were wide, almost pleading. "I really, really like you." At the time, I brushed it off, thinking it was just another fling. I didn't give it much thought then. We hadn't spoken since that night, and I hadn't saved her number on my phone. But there it was, saved in my contacts, with her photo and everything. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. That voice on the phone, the giggle. Could it have been her? But how? How could she have found my phone? And how could she have returned it to my nightstand without me even knowing? I sat there for a while, trying to piece it all together. None of it made any sense. Did I lose my phone? Did someone take it? Or was it all in my head? Emily had always enjoyed her solitude. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, her little house was her sanctuary. The soft hum of the wind, the distant chatter of birds. It was the peaceful life she craved after years of living in the noisy city. But lately, something had changed. There was a gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach, like someone was watching her, even when no one was there. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe she was just being paranoid. But small things began to happen. Her keys weren't where she left them. A chair in her kitchen was slightly moved, and the blinds in her bedroom, which she always closed, were sometimes slightly ajar in the morning. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, maybe stress from work, but the unease refused to leave. One evening, after coming back from a trip to the store, she noticed something chilling. The shoes she kept by the door, perfectly aligned, were now haphazardly placed. It was subtle, but enough to make her heart race. Deciding not to take any more chances, she installed a couple of security cameras around the house. Just to be safe, she told herself. For the next few days, things seemed normal again. She would check the cameras every morning and find nothing unusual. But then, one night, as she sat reviewing the footage, she froze. At around 3 a.m., while she was sound asleep, a figure moved silently through her living room. The man was tall, with a hood obscuring his face. He didn't steal anything. Instead, he made his way into her bedroom, where the camera captured him standing by her bed, watching her for several minutes before slipping out quietly. Panic gripped her chest. Her first instinct was to call the police. When the officers arrived, they reviewed the footage.
O uso consciente de medicamentos depende de uma avaliação e acompanhamento médico. O tratamento recomendado pelo seu médico é para você, pois considera a sua condição individual de saúde. Novo Nordisk, pelo uso consciente de medicamentos.
And immediately began an investigation. The presence of the intruder was undeniable, but there were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing that could help them identify who he was. They advised Emily to stay somewhere else for a while, but she refused. This was her home. Why should she leave? Days passed, and though the police had opened a case, they didn't have much to go on. Emily's life, however, became consumed by fear. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when she was alone. At work, she felt eyes on her, and during her evening walks, she was convinced someone was following her, though no one was ever there when she turned around. One particularly cold evening, Emily settled in bed early. She double-checked the locks on her doors and windows, as had become her nightly ritual. Satisfied that everything was secure, she reviewed the camera footage from earlier in the day. Nothing unusual. With a sigh of relief, she closed her laptop and crawled under the covers. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house made her heart race. The wind outside rustled the trees, and Emily could swear she heard footsteps in the distance. Telling herself she was just being paranoid, she finally drifted off. A loud creak woke her up around 2 a.m. The house was silent, save for the occasional ticking of the clock. Her heart raced again. She sat up, straining her ears. Nothing. She told herself it was the wind, a tree branch scraping against the window, anything to calm her nerves. But then she heard it, the soft sound of something scraping against her bedroom door. Her blood ran cold. She reached for her phone, hands trembling, but the noise stopped. Slowly, she crept out of bed and walked towards the door. She pressed her ear against it, holding her breath. Silence. Suddenly, the door creaked open on its own, just an inch, as if nudged from the other side. Her heart pounded in her ears. She didn't dare move. Then, in the crack of the door, she saw him. A tall figure, the same hooded man from the footage, stood there in her room, staring at her. Without thinking, Emily bolted for the front door, her feet barely touching the floor as she ran. She didn't stop until she was out in the cold night air, screaming for help. The neighbors' lights flicked on, but she didn't wait for them. She ran across the street, banging on doors, screaming for someone to call the police. The man didn't follow her. When the police arrived, they swept the house, but he was gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. But this time, things were different. They found evidence of tampering with the locks, confirming that the man had been entering the house for some time without leaving any obvious signs. Emily was advised not to return to the house alone. The police promised to keep an eye on her property and ramp up their investigation, but that wasn't enough for her. She couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in that house again, not knowing if the man would come back. So, she packed her things and left to stay with a friend, her heart still pounding with every shadow she saw. Days later, the police arrested a man wandering the streets nearby, dirty and disheveled, begging for food. It was the same man from Emily's camera footage. When they searched him, they found a notebook with detailed notes about Emily's house, her routines, and even the time she would sleep. He had been watching her for months, planning the perfect moment to strike. Though the man was in custody, Emily never truly felt safe again. Even in her new home, far away from the one she'd abandoned, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to enter her life again. When I first moved into the small house in that quiet town, I had no idea how things would turn out. It was my first big step into adulthood, with my very own place. The house was small, just one floor with 2 bedrooms and a cozy living space, perfect for hosting a few friends. I had been living there for a few weeks already, and everything seemed fine. My landlord, Michelle, was friendly and understanding, and I was grateful she chose me to rent her house, especially since she seemed to prefer a female tenant. But things started to get strange after a few weeks. It was a regular work night, just like any other. I had just settled in for the evening, relaxing on the couch after a long day at my new job. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was late, much later than anyone should be visiting. I felt a jolt of unease. Who could be knocking at this hour? I hesitated, standing just on the other side of the door, my hand hovering over the handle. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. No one answered. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but there was nothing. My heart was pounding as I backed away from the door. I didn't dare open it. Instead, I went back to the living room, my nerves on edge, and tried to convince myself it was just a prank or maybe someone at the wrong house. The next morning, as I was getting ready to leave for work, I opened the front door and saw something that made my blood run cold. A large post-it note was taped to the storm door. In bold, messy handwriting, it read, "Hello, beautiful." My mind instantly flashed back to the knock from the night before. Whoever had left this note must have been the one at my door. But who could it be? I didn't recognize the handwriting. I crumpled the note in disgust and threw it in the trash, trying to shake off the unease. I hoped, foolishly, that it was a one-time thing. That night, while I was cooking dinner, it happened again. Another knock, this time a bit earlier in the evening. I stood frozen for a moment, spatula in hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked slowly to the door, my breath catching in my throat. This time I didn't say anything. I just listened. But again, there was no sound, no indication of who it could be. The absence of a peephole, or any way to see who was on the other side, made it even more terrifying. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. Instead, I backed away, my thoughts racing. The following morning, dread washed over me as I opened the door and found another note stuck to the glass. "I like to watch you," it said, in the same messy handwriting as before. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a prank. Someone was watching me. I took a picture of the note and sent it to my parents and to Michelle. My mind was racing with questions. Who was doing this? Could it be someone I knew? Michelle was shocked when I told her about the notes and the knocks. She assured me she had no stalkers or issues with any men, but her words did little to ease my fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Desperate for some sense of security, I left a note on the door after work that day. It read, "If you're looking for Michelle, she does not live here. She only rents this house out. If you continue to come here, I will be reporting this to the police." Writing it out made me feel a bit more in control, but deep down, I was terrified. That night I lay in bed, every noise amplified in the silence of the house. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited, straining to hear anything out of the ordinary. To my relief, there were no knocks, and I began to think maybe my note had scared them off. The next morning, I woke up feeling a bit more at ease. I opened the door and removed the note I had left. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't my note. It was another note from them. My hands shook as I read it. I'm not... "Michelle, I'm looking for you," it said, followed by my name. Panic surged through me. This person knew my name. They were targeting me specifically. I sent the note to my dad immediately. He responded within minutes, telling me he was packing a bag and coming to stay with me. I felt a small sense of relief knowing he would be there, but the fear gnawed at me all day. Who was doing this? How did they know my name? My dad arrived at my house by the time I got home from work. His presence was comforting, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. We decided to call the police that night, hoping they would catch whoever was tormenting me. My dad, being a retired police officer, knew how to handle the situation, but even he seemed on edge. We spoke with an officer outside the house, and my dad insisted on staying out on the front stoop for hours, even after I went to bed. That night, I slept a little easier, knowing my dad was there to protect me. Thankfully, the person didn't return that night. But I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The fear had taken root, and I knew I needed to leave. Michelle was understanding when I told her I had to move out. I packed up my things and found a new place to live. The sense of relief was overwhelming when I finally left that house behind. Whoever was stalking me didn't follow me to my new place, confirming that it wasn't a coworker or anyone from my immediate life. But the question still lingered. Who was it, and why did they choose me? I'll likely never know. I learned to trust my instincts and to take any signs of danger seriously. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Sometimes the only option is to get out before it's too late. I am Ethan, a 20-year-old college student, driving my new car on the winding road through 100-mile wilderness. The strong winds shook the surrounding branches, leaves flying everywhere, creating a continuous rustling sound. The rain was pouring down, heavy drops falling on the windshield, creating monotonous and gloomy sounds. I saw a woman walking in the rain. She looked tired and weak. The woman's dress is a light purple dress, knee-length. The fabric is thin, with delicate lace patterns running along the hem. The waistline has a small white belt, adding a graceful accent. The dress has short sleeves, a round neckline, and a few sparkling beads attached to the chest area. The dress becomes heavy and clingy, hugging the body tightly, revealing every curve and contour.
Não tem um embaixo?
A sense of worry and sympathy made me decide to stop the car
Não
and
tinham duas
ask if she
bandeiras?
needed a ride. The woman with tired eyes and soaking wet hair said her house was nearby and didn't need specific directions. She asked to sit in the back. My kindness made me feel sorry for her, and I agreed to her request, quickly urging her to get in the car. I tried to make conversation and asked, "Where do you live? Do you need me to take you to a
Lembra que teve uma vez que o carro
specific
começou a envelhecer.
address?" The woman just stared at me in silence. The silence and her strange stare made me uncomfortable, but I continued to drive. I remembered I had homework to do tonight and
Mel.
needed coffee to stay awake.
Mel!
I said to her, "I'll stop at a rest stop to buy coffee. Do you want anything?"
Não existe contraindicação com mel, Ken. Pode comer várias vezes.
I stopped at a rest
O
stop
meu mel.
coffee. When I came back, I found that the woman had disappeared without a trace, without saying a word. The mysterious disappearance of the woman made me feel confused and a bit worried. However, she was just a harmless woman we happened to encounter in life. I didn't think much and drove home. When I got home, I parked the car in the garage. My dog ran out and barked loudly as if I were a stranger. Occasionally, he would get overly excited and bark loudly, but today his barking was quite peculiar. However, I decided to ignore the dog's odd behavior, went upstairs to change clothes, and took a shower to relax my mind. After showering, I saw a long trail of water from the door to the bed. The trail was dark, damp, and cold, as if something soaking wet had dragged itself across. I wondered where the water trail came from, looked around, and tried to find anything unusual. The cold shiver down my spine made it impossible to ignore this eerie trail. I decided to check the entire house, a sense of unease rising within me. I saw my dog soaking wet lying on the floor, feeling relieved it wasn't something horrifying as I thought. I sighed helplessly and bathed the dog. After bathing the dog, it was late. I finished my coffee, hoping to stay awake to do my homework. The coffee tasted strange and diluted, probably because I had left it too long, so the flavor had changed. After drinking the coffee, I sat at the desk to do my homework, but I felt very sleepy and dozed off. In my dream, I felt my dog playing around my legs and licking my hands and feet. The next morning, I woke up surprised to find myself in bed with the sheets slightly damp. I wondered how my hair got wet despite drying it right after the shower. The window was open and my room door was locked. When I opened the door, my dog was lying outside, wagging its tail. The dog kept sniffing me as if there was a strange smell on me. I didn't think much, prepared my stuff to go to school. I carried my things down to the car. When I opened the trunk, I saw a wet purple dress inside. I shuddered as I recalled the image of the woman from yesterday. It seemed like she was also wearing a similar purple dress. I felt scared and confused about what was happening. I couldn't be certain if I had truly given a woman a ride last night, but one thing I knew for sure, this dress wasn't mine. And if this was someone's prank, it truly had me trembling with fear. How would you explain those eerie events? Drop your thoughts in the comments before we dive into our next story. Hello everyone, I'm the creator behind My Story Untold. Finding even a few people who share my love for horror has been incredibly touching and motivating. I hope you'll continue to support me in the future. Please don't hesitate to share your feedback so I can improve. If my work interests you, please like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads.